Today we're going to start with how we solve linear equations, and to do that I have some examples up here and a method that I call the RAP. If you go to the study aid section, you'll see an actual printout of the RAP and you'll be able to follow along with it. But I'll walk you through it as we go through this. First example we're going to start with is 2x plus 5 equals 15. What the RAP simply says is we're going to put our variable, the x, on the left-hand side, and we're going to move all the numbers to the right-hand side. I've had students in the past say, well, to keep that easy for me to remember, sometimes they put a vertical line down through here so they can see left side, right side. How we solve this is we're going to take the letters on the left. Well, our 2x is already on the left-hand side of the equal sign. We're going to move that 5, the number, over to the right-hand side. That becomes a negative 5. When we move something to the opposite side, it becomes its opposite. So in this case it was a positive 5, now it will become a negative 5. Once I move those over, the RAP goes, letters on the left, numbers on the right. You do it this way, you get them all right. You do your like terms. Now I'm going to combine this 15 and negative 5, in which case I'll get a positive 10. On the left-hand side, I have no like terms to combine, so I just have the 2x. I did my like terms. Now I do what's called multiply or divide. In this case, I like the fact that all we're going to do is divide by 2, and most of you have seen something like that before. We divide both sides by 2, and what happens is, we do it this way, we get them all right. It walks us right to our answer. In this case, it walks us to that answer of x equals 5. Which, just to point out, in most textbooks that we look in, the variable will always be on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and the number will be on the right-hand side. So it's a nice, simple method for us to be able to follow systematically to take us to our answer. Let's do another one. Example number 2. Letters on the left. I'm going to move my x over. When I move it over, it becomes its opposite. It's a positive x here, it becomes a negative x. Numbers on the right. I'm moving that 2 over. When it moves over, it becomes a negative 2. We do it this way, we get them all right. We do our like terms. On the left-hand side, 3x minus 1x would leave us with a positive 2x. On the right-hand side, 8 minus 2 would leave us with 6. After we do our like terms, we multiply or divide. Again, you'll notice in this case, we're going to be dividing. In fact, we'll divide by 2. We do it this way, and we easy slide by because it walks us right through to our answer. One thing I'd like to go back and point out, some people have a question about, wait a minute, I thought numbers on the right, well, you got this 3x here, or on this first example, we had a 2x. Well, remember that multiplication is nothing but a shortcut for addition. Typically, I could write this 3x as x plus x plus x. Well, we would never do that. We would always just write it as 3x. But that's why this 3 is connected to the x. Therefore, it's part of the x. That's why it's not a number and why it stays on the left-hand side and our numbers go over to the right-hand side. Let's try another example. I have some others here that I have written down for us to see if we can work through some of these. This one over here, we run into a situation where we have to use a distributive property before we can start. And we've talked about the distributive property before. So we'd start out by taking the 3 times the m, in which case I'd get a 3m. Then I take a 3 times the 2. It's going to give me a positive 6, so that's why I put plus 6 equals. And on this side, distribute the 2, it would give me a positive 2m. Distribute the 2 with the 3, and I would get a positive 6. Now I carry out the RAP. Letters on the left, I'm going to take that 2m, move it over, it's going to become a negative 2m. Numbers on the right, I'm going to move that 6. Remember the 3 is connected with the m, so the 6 comes over. It becomes a negative 6. Do it this way. We'll get them all right. We do our like terms. On the right-hand side, I get 6 minus 6 is 0. On the left-hand side, I get 3m minus 2m is 1m. and look at that. We do it this way. We easy slide by because it literally walked us right through the answer of m equals 0. Now sometimes we'll run into some problems that have squares thrown into them, and I don't want us to be too concerned about those. So let's walk through how we do one like this. We'd start out by just leaving the left-hand side the way we see it, in which case I'd have an x squared minus an 8x plus 15 equals. But on this side we have to do what's called FOIL. We have to multiply these two out before we can do anything. So to multiply these, here's what we're going to get. I multiply the x times the x, in which case that's going to give me an x squared. The outside, x times the 5, will give me a plus 5x. The inside, when I multiply those, will give me a negative 3x. And the last, when I put those together, will give me a negative 15. Now, before I start doing my wrap, I'm going to put my like terms together. So on the left-hand side, I still have my x squared minus 8x plus 15 equals. On the right-hand side, I now have an x squared. I have a plus 2x, and I have a minus 15. Now, just using the wrap, just the way I said we would use it, here's how it goes. Letters on the left. Well, that means that this x squared, which is a letter, a variable, is going to come over to the left. When I bring it over, it'll become a negative x squared. I also have a 2x. Got to move that 2x over. When I move that 2x over, it'll become a negative 2x because it was positive on the right-hand side. Numbers on the right. This 15, we're going to move that 15 over. It becomes a negative 15. And now when I combine all of these, I do my like terms, watch what happens. On the right-hand side, I get a negative 30. Negative 15 plus a negative 15 is a negative 30. But look what happens to my x's. My x squareds are going to cancel out. I got a positive 1 with a negative 1. That becomes 0x squared, so they're gone. When I combine my other like terms, I get a negative 8x and a negative 2x is a negative 6x. We do our like terms, then multiply or divide. Again, in this case, we'll divide both by negative 6. And when I do that, I now have my answer of x equals, and a negative divided by a negative will equal a positive 5. Okay? So that's one way that we can do to use the wrap. Another way that we can use the wrap in a little bit more difficult problem will be if I get one that looks like this. And I often have people say, well, wait a minute, what if you have fractions involved? Now how are you going to work with it? Well, let's take one that potentially would give us some fractions that we have to deal with. What if I had a simple one like 2/3 x minus 4 equals, and let's say 8 in this case? How do I solve one that has some fractions? Well, we don't treat it any differently. Letters on the left. The 2/3 is linked with the x, so it's going to stay on the left. We move our numbers to the right. So this negative 4 is going to go over. When you move a negative 4 over, it becomes a positive 4. We now do our like terms. Nothing to go with the 2/3. So we end up with 2/3 x equals, and then when I take the 8 and the 4, I get a 12. Now, multiply or divide. Some people would say go ahead and divide by that 2/3, but that means we're dividing a natural number by a rational number. Boy, that makes a lot of extra work. I think it's easier if in this case we multiply instead of dividing. And what am I going to multiply by? Well, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of this coefficient, which means I'll multiply by the 3/2. By multiplying by its reciprocal, I know it's going to take me back to a 1, or I can call this the multiplicative inverse. And when I do that, that means that on the left-hand side, I'll end up with just my x, and on the right-hand side, I now have to work out this calculation. So what ends up happening is my 3's would cancel, my 2's would cancel. I end up with just this 1x on the left-hand side, which is what I wanted. Keep in mind, and this is where some people forget, this 12 right here is like a 12 over 1. So now when I multiply my fractions, and or in this case I can simplify ahead of time, I do have 2 does go into 12 6 times. So now I've got 6 times 3, which gives me my 18. It would be 18 over 1, or we just take the answer x equals 18. So I hope this helps as getting you started in being able to use the RAP.